Hello and welcome to the Womb Centered Healing Podcast. I'm Sama Morningstar and I have Amrita here with me today. Thank you so much, Amrita, for joining me. Amrita has been a collaborator in this project from the beginning. You were a guest speaker at the Womb Centered Healing Temple Opening Summit. And I'm so glad to have you here. Your leadership in the feminine empowerment world is so needed and so precious. So I really appreciate how you've shown up as a collaborator in my projects, and I'm so grateful to you for all of that you've offered, and the wisdom that you've offered, and your presence is just so valuable. So thank you so much for joining me. And I would love for you to introduce yourself a little bit more. And we talked just before we started the recording that you're interested in talking about this idea of feminine leadership and how we can approach stepping into leadership as womb-centered healing practitioners, and in any of the ways that we're stepping into leadership professionally, personally, in our communities, in our families, from this sense of feminine power awareness. I'm sure you have great wisdom to share with us about that, as I'm familiar with your journey of really stepping into your role of taking leadership in the sexual healing field and arena, and you gathered over the years of doing that, I'm sure, loads of wisdom to share with us about taking and stepping into feminine leadership. So please share with us a little bit more for the podcast listeners about all of that.
Okay, sure. I'll just do a little introduction of myself too. And thank you so much for having me and for inviting me to be part of all of this from the very beginning, which has been such a pleasure and so beautiful to witness how it's been unfolding in its weaving.
Mm-hmm.
So my name is Amrita Grace, and I am an award-winning best-selling author of 2 books. The best-selling book is called Reclaiming Aphrodite, The Journey to Sexual Wholeness. Mm-hmm. And I also wrote a second book called Dancing with Breast Cancer, The Sacred Feminine Path to Wholeness. Mm-hmm. I am the co-founder of the Sacred Feminine Mystery School. And in this school, I am training women to be empowered feminine leaders in the field of sacred sexual awakening and healing. And this is a divine calling for me. It's my soul's path, something that I got called forward very strongly into in the last year and a half, and was given a global vision and invited by Spirit to start training teachers in very high integrity sexual healing work so that we can get the empowered feminine leadership happening in this realm where it is so needed.
Mm-hmm. It is needed. It is needed. And so please share more about, well, I'm really curious how you experience receiving this call, this divine guidance, was to step into feminine leadership in this way. You said in just this last couple of years, although knowing your story and the journey of development up until this call came in this particular form, I'm imagining that there have been calls along the way that said, you have to, it's time now for you to get involved in this. This is the thing you're needing to be involved in. And these are the people you needing to be involved with. Along the way, little calls. And then it sounds like though and I'm familiar with this kind of experience this last year or so, it's like, okay, you've done all this groundwork. Now, here's the thing now. So I'm really curious as to what your practice is around that, because it's a practice of bringing our attention to divine guidance in my experience. And sometimes there's like a big, wake up call where there's something that happens that makes you listen. But then once we have those, there's this cultivation of, okay, I want to make sure I'm listening so that I'm hearing the messages along the way and don't have to be shook up to get it, right? At least that's been my
Yeah.
experience. So I'm curious
Yeah.
about your practice of listening to that guidance and following that call to step into leadership.
Okay, that was a multifaceted question that I'm happy
I'm
to
good at
answer.
that.
You are. You're very good at that. So, so yes, certainly I have been working in this field for more than 13 years. And even before that, I was already an ordained high priestess. And really, my big wake-up call around listening was being diagnosed with breast cancer in 2013.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a really easy experience. Honestly, it was joyful, very short, very brief, but it had a huge message that came with it. And that message was stop.
Mm-hmm.
And it was stop going after things.
Mm-hmm.
Listen and receive.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of deciding what you want and going after it, which is what I'd always done. Nothing wrong with that. It was time to really slow down and be still for a while. And that while was a few years. It was pretty uncomfortable for me, being a very dynamic person and really kind of a go-getter. But I listened to that message. And honestly, I didn't think I'd be coming back into the world of sacred sexual healing and awakening. And it was kind of a surprise to me. So my business partner and beloved friend and one-time mentor, Caroline Muir, and I decided to teach a week-long for women in Costa Rica in 2017. First time we taught a week-long retreat in 5 years. And we thought, well, let's just do this thing and see what happens. And it sold out 3 months in advance. And as I went through that week and experienced the women being so receptive to and responding to this work in a way that felt new, like it was time. It was time now in a way that it hadn't been time before. I came out of that week realizing that I needed to train teachers. And I was receiving these pieces of a global vision around the impact that having a large number of teachers of very high integrity of this work could have on the planet. And I chose and decided to teach only women, but I'm teaching women to work with all genders because all genders and all ages need this work. So I came out of that week long, and that was in late 2017, knowing that I was going to be creating a teacher training and not knowing exactly how that was going to be accomplished, but knowing that I could. And a year and a half later, it's been quite a lot of learning for me. It's been a whole lot of very intensive creation and a whole lot of 70-hour work weeks, to be perfectly honest with you, to pull it off. And I did pull off the first cohort 6-month program, the first teacher training, which completed in January. And now I'm preparing for the next one, which begins in November. But I learned so much in the process. But the most important thing that I'm aware of now in this time and place, and all the mistakes that I made and all the lessons that I've learned, is that we must be bold. We must stand in our truth, and we must speak what we are passionate about, and we must bring our gifts to bear in the world. We must. We cannot reduce ourselves and make ourselves quiet any longer. We simply cannot.
I just want to receive that and let that sound into the space. Thank you for speaking that. We must. I feel that calling in you, and that we must. And I feel that in myself too. And I feel that many listeners might be feeling that as well. I must do this. I must do this. And that really sounds like the answer to some of my questions is, what does that divine guidance feel like to you? And it sounds like your answer is this feeling of, I must do this. I must do this. And you may have had, like for me, I've had, personal ceremonies that I've done, and asking for guidance and receiving information, or perhaps while you were on this training retreat, you've had moments of reflection where it became clear these pieces of this global vision. And as you're witnessing this, the inspiration arising out of your experience with the students there in Costa Rica and all of that, feeds this. There's always this voice of what you must do given the experience that you're having, right? That I have to follow this path. It's so clear, it gets laid out so clear that this is what needs to happen. And all of our experiences, in my experience, all of my experiences feed that. Oh, this is what must happen. This is the need that's calling to be met. And it's almost like it's part, for me, it feels like part of this divine mother instinct of the womb, of caring for the need that's presenting itself that needs to be met. And as we step into leadership and are called into leadership in a greater and greater sphere in our community, it feels like that I must tend to this global need begins to be the guiding energy. And so it sounds like this global need was presenting itself to you, and that feminine way of stepping into caring for that need. That's what it feels like to me around feminine leadership. It's like, oh, we're caring for the needs of our community and our world and our species and our families and in all the circles that we're in. So I'm curious to hear more about how feminine leadership is developing for you out of all of these experiences.
Well, there's a thread that I want to pull on what you just said, and that is caring for the global need and caring for others and families and communities. This is one of the pieces that we absolutely must address within ourselves before we can stand in our leadership, mm-hmm. because we have been trained to care for others first. Mm-hmm. And to go into these patterns of codependence where we put everybody else's needs before our own. And that has absolutely got to be healed, mm-hmm. before we can be successful leaders. Mm-hmm. It has to be addressed, and there are many things that have to be addressed. So we've got to turn to ourselves first and really look at, where are the areas that I'm shut down? Where are the areas that I haven't tended to in my body and my psyche? And what I find so often is that women are shut down in their voices, and they've cut themselves off from the waist down. And it's really, there's really no fault around it. It's just that we haven't been taught how to tend ourselves in an embodied way. Mm-hmm. We haven't been taught that our sexual energy is our life force energy, and that it is absolutely imperative that we have access to this energy to feed our entire lives. And because of all the taboos that have been happening around sexuality and sexual energy for eons, this egg is just starting to crack open in such a big way. I mean, it really has for decades now, but more than ever, as all of the sexual wounding starts to emerge and rise on the planet and to be healed and be integrated, it can cause a lot of confusion around, what is this sexual energy about? What's it for? I don't need that. I'm not in a sexual relationship. I've shut that down. But that's not true. You do need it. So as we address these pieces, within ourselves and fill ourselves up, and have a wholeness that we can access within ourselves, and a full embodiment that we have access to in ourselves as well, then we can start to look to what are the needs of our family, our community, our planet. And we really can't look outside of ourselves and be of assistance until we have addressed these things within ourselves.
Mm-hmm. You know, and the way you say that, I totally agree with you on that. And the way you're saying that, it could seem a bit overwhelming for someone. For me personally, I know there's ways that I fall into that pattern that was well demonstrated to me by my mother and my grandmother and all the other women in my family, of putting everyone else's needs before my own. And it feels like, the way you said it, that I would have to stop doing that altogether. And it feels like my life would have to come to a complete stop, you know, in order
Right.
to really, and I know that's not really what you mean, because there's an integrative, progressive, I've worked on this for years and have been aware of it for years. And there's always going to be, it feels like, or perhaps one day there won't be as much, but there's always going to be layers of healing and release and reclaiming of vital energy that's tied up in that pattern, layer upon layer. And that each layer that I uncover and address and attend to, then makes available more of my vital energy, so that it could be it can be, at least in my experience, a progressive healing process over time. It's just, I just wanted to speak to the listener who might be hearing that, saying, oh, I have to stop this completely before I can, I have to end this pattern completely before I can help anyone else. When I'm sure in your experience too, and in your, when you support your students, it is a gradual process. And I'd love for you to speak to that, you know, because that seems daunting, to be like, okay, I have to be completely free of that pattern and totally taking care of myself to a completely overflowing cup, when the structures in life just don't really allow that. And it can take some time to shift those structures as we're going through that healing process. And so please speak to that and that process.
Beautiful. Yes. Thank you for bringing that forth. You caught me on a day, or we just sort of sparked off this conversation from a very passionate kind of place for me.
Yes, we did.
And so I got into that va-boom place.
Va-boom.
Right. It is a lifelong process.
Yes.
Of course. And it's all interwoven. I think the most important thing is just to bring awareness. Mm-hmm. It's really about bringing awareness. Mm-hmm. And being able to witness ourselves and how we show up in all of our interactions with others. And then to just notice when there's something that doesn't work, or that doesn't feel good, or that you'd like to change next time. Mm-hmm. It is a lifelong process of noticing and shifting and choosing, and sometimes choosing not to make that change, and that's okay too. Mm-hmm. And it really doesn't have to be daunting. Part of what I feel is this immediacy of the need. And that's sometimes where I come from. But really, we each need to take it at our own pace, and in our own lives, what's perfectly appropriate, because we're each starting in a different circumstance. And it may just need to be baby steps.
Mm-hmm. And isn't that one of the big challenges of feminine leadership? Because on the one hand, I really feel that urgency of the need, like we were speaking about, at the beginning of, we must do this, right? This is like the survival of our species and our loved ones, and the vitality of our very core of our being is requiring us to do this, and let's do it now because we must, right? And so there's this sense of urgency at the same time as in a feminine healing modality and a feminine leadership way of allowing for each individual and ourselves even to have that natural pacing of our process. And because a lot of healing modalities, and we're kind of recovering from this, that a lot of healing modalities that have been under a more sort of masculine, penetrative model, kind of push people, not kind of, very much push people, and I've experienced this a lot, of pushing people to hurry up and do what must be done.
Get somewhere.
And achieve, like, be done with this pattern, be free of this pattern, liberate yourself from this pattern so you can get on with your work, right? And that can actually, for me, experiencing that from some of my teachers in my background, sent my deepest hurts into deeper hiding, because they did not have permission to have the gentle pacing that they needed, and that penetrative, we've got a sharpness of attention. It was like a snail getting its little soft eyeballs touched, and it would just go back into its shell. And so for me, that is an important aspect of the feminine leadership, of that holding. And we've spoken about this, especially in our summit interview. By the way, if I didn't mention, Amrita is one of the guest speakers in the Embodied Shakti Summit, and we spoke in that summit of this feminine way of holding space in healing processes for others, through connecting with the emptiness and that open space in the womb, and simply holding space for whatever needs to happen for a person, whatever baby steps or big transformations or
nothing.
A lot of numbness can sometimes come up, but apathy, or there's a lot of feelings that can come up that were part of the coping mechanisms that we might have taken on going through whatever injurious circumstances or trauma experiences that we've had. So things like apathy, numbness, indifference, all of those things can come up within the healing environment. And or resistance, for example, and those are all valid coping mechanisms when it wasn't safe. So of course now when it is safe, those are going to come up again. And if we're saying, no, you got to break through your resistance or push past your fear, or do those things, then it just makes those things wrong, or it pulls the scab off before the wound is quite done healing, and just rewounds the wound. And so this allowing for whatever needs to happen can actually, at whatever pace it needs to happen in, it can actually allow, this feminine way can allow for deeper hurts to arise and come into that safety zone. And so I would love to hear your reflections out of that.
Yeah. Well, it's so interesting. I'm going to out myself a little bit here and say that I didn't really come into this call as grounded and in my feminine body as I would like to be. So, because I've been working in very linear things, a website and learning, steep learning curves around email lists and just things like this that I've been working on for these past weeks, that's kind of where my head was. And so even as you were talking, I was remembering, oh yes, this is what I do, this is what I teach. Presence, stillness, emptiness. Oh yeah, I remember that's who I am. So I really appreciate you taking things in that direction so that I could settle into myself in a more feminine way, because I was coming from that very more masculine place. And I love that you called that out so that we can settle it into a softer place, because that's really where we want to be, is in a softer place. Not that this softer place can't have its edges, because it does, but to remember the feminine ways, which are the ways that we are bringing to the planet right now. We are helping ground them on the planet. We are practicing them for ourselves. We are showing others how to practice them. We are teaching others how to teach others to practice them. And it's really what's needed to bring some balance to us as individuals, and to our families, and to our communities, and to our planet. So that's really beautiful. Thank you.
And what a beautiful example of an aspect that you just demonstrated, of an aspect of feminine leadership that I'm so delighted to experience in you and in myself and in some of the other feminine leadership people that we're connecting with, which is a humbleness of being willing to share a vulnerability and not have to, maintain some sense of authority or hierarchy, right? We're shedding the hierarchy and saying, we're all human beings and we all have our challenges. And yes, I may have many years of experience in, perhaps more than someone else, or some of the listeners are more than you, or more than you might have more than I, in a particular area of exploration out of our own need. We might have more because we had the resources and the guidance and the circumstances to support us to have that, and now we're in a position to share that. But when what's caused difficulty in some of the models of leadership that we might attribute to, patriarchal, hierarchical thing, is when that person then is holding themselves sort of separate, higher than, better than, more advanced than, and they're always right, and they always know what they're doing. And then if they're having an off day, they have a reason why that was really the best thing for them to do right then for everyone involved, and because they're the teacher. And so, because I said so. So it's this sort of, whereas it's demonstrated, that it doesn't have to be that way. We don't have to assert our leadership by telling little lies about ourselves all the time, right? We can be honest, vulnerable, undefended, and receive. You demonstrated receiving what I was saying as a nourishment for you. And I feel that is that balance that you spoke of at the beginning of, how can I make sure my needs are met and receive in order to be able to care for others. And when we can be available to receive wisdom, support, guidance from wherever it comes, freeing ourselves from these hierarchical ideas about I'm the teacher, or, this, that. And just like in this call, who's interviewing who, I've sort of loosened up the idea of me being the interviewer and the guest speakers being the guest speaker, and I have had listeners really encourage it to go in that direction. They were really enjoying this. We don't have to have these, starkly defined roles anymore that we have to stick to despite whatever vulnerabilities might be coming up. And so that humbleness of, oh, I'm going to out myself right now. This is something that I'm working on. This is a challenge for me. And thank you so much. And being able to receive that in the midst of this is a perfect example, I feel, of feminine leadership that's coming from us up, because that's completely disarming. Now I feel like, oh, wow. Okay, there we are, right there. I got to support Amrita, someone I look up to and look to for and you were, I had something that was supportive for you. That, how does that make me feel? That makes me feel like, wow, I'm in touch with something too, you know? And so,
Oh yeah.
And I can imagine that you probably do this with your students, is, you know, it's not something that you do, you just show up with that vulnerability and that realness and that transparency of being a human being. And I've seen from reading your books that, you know, it's about sharing, that we're all on this journey together, and there's difficult parts, and we can support each other through those parts. And doesn't have to be that, you know, you're some authority or I'm some authority, but that we're all in this very humbling process of healing together. So thank you.
We definitely are
that.
all in it together. You're so welcome, and thank you for bringing that forward. There's one word I didn't hear you say that I wanted to bring forward, and that's authenticity.
Yes.
And really, we weren't encouraged to be authentic, most of us as children.
Mm-hmm.
We were encouraged to conform to what our parents thought we should be and what our teachers thought we should be. And that really shut down authenticity in a lot of us and taught us how to feel shame around being ourselves. So part of the secret to me being able to say something like, oh yeah, I really wasn't in a very good space, and I was speaking from kind of a masculine place, and I'm going to out myself about that, was I don't need to feel ashamed of that. And I don't need to export the shame. I don't need to blame it on something else. I can just go, oh yeah, that's what I see happened. That's what was true, and that's what I witnessed in myself. And that's coming back to that idea of awareness and witnessing ourselves. So I witnessed myself moving from this place of this sort of more linear, masculine, fired up place, which there's nothing wrong with that at all. I use it very much to my advantage. Into this softer, more feminine place as you guided the conversation in that direction. And as I witnessed that, I noticed the contrast. And then as I noticed the contrast, I can point that out to myself. I can point that out to in what I say to listeners and to you. It's like, oh yeah, what it does is it takes things deeper. And really, when we can take things deeper and more intimate in any conversation, that makes a big difference for everybody involved.
Yeah.
It makes an impact. Because it's really what we're here for, to be in connection, to be in community, to be in communion, and to really have the opportunity to go deeper with whomever we're speaking with or being with. And it's an incredible privilege to have the opportunity to do that.
Indeed. And to connect sort of to what's underneath all those shame patterns that you spoke with, and to what's really true.
And that was a big piece of work that, I mean, it was a huge ongoing piece of work, that piece around shame that I did, that I talk a lot about in my book, because as someone who acted out sexually in a lot of really inappropriate ways for many, many years, I had a lot of shame built up inside of me. And when it came time to do my healing around that, it took quite some time. But eventually, I got to a place where sometimes I would just feel some shame. but I wouldn't need to have a story around it.
Mm.
It would just pass through and out, and I would just watch it go. And it's like, oh, that was interesting. I don't need to know what it was, but there it goes.
Mm.
And even now, the times when I feel shame are really rare.
Mm.
And that feels really good.
It might have been all the time before, like a much more frequent, huh?
Oh, well, once I got myself out of denial,
Mm.
because I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't feeling it then, but once I hit that point of being ready to heal myself, then the wall of shame
Mm.
had to be dealt with, and it took years. But it was a process that became easier and easier, and it really just, it comes from a place of commitment. I want to be a person who is full of integrity, and I want to be in full integrity, especially around my sexual energy. That was my declaration.
Mm.
And I didn't even have those words at the time, but I came to have those words as I got into doing my own sexual healing work.
Mm.
And it did take a while, but the shame does eventually leave
Mm.
and become so much less substantial
Mm.
in my experience.
Mm. Powerful. Well, first of all, I just want to let that sound in the space, that this blessing that I'm sure your words are for many listeners who may have begun the process as you did, and feel this wall of shame that you described, and that you can speak from your experience of that the shame can subside and not be as overwhelming. And so just holding that beauty moment for ourselves and for our listeners.
Yeah.
And it's very impactful for me because I'm getting a sense of some of the things that we talked about earlier, the authoritarian, hierarchical ways that we're sort of setting over here, that we're looking to move away from for a more feminine, say, approach to leadership. The shame seems universal, masculine or feminine. And so it feels to me like that that masculine forms of leadership could be healed by sorting out the shame portions, and there could be a non-hierarchical, authentic, non-domination or more partnership-based way for masculine leadership to take place too. And I feel that that's probably a part of your feminine leadership. It's probably combining both a healthy, uh, masculine aspects, linear thinking, logical thinking that we associate with masculine, being able to do your website, being able to create structures for your programs, being able to, define things and set goals and set timelines and things like that, are all associated with masculine skills, which are wonderful skills. But when we have that wall of shame, or that body of shame that we're in denial about, that's what creates that urge to set ourselves apart and, have this bravado and this authority, and lean on authoritarian ways, are sourced in shame. And that's very potent realization for me, to see that. And then the feminine does that, and it's in its own way too, where when the shame is under the veil of denial, it comes out with unhealthy, in anyone, wherever we are on the spectrum of gender identity or gender expression, that wall of shame, that it's not okay for us to be who we are, that we've all accumulated, if we're in denial about it, that's what's creating a lot, or that's one of the things that's creating a lot of these behaviors that perpetuate and our dis-ease or our unharmonious ways of being. And so I'm curious as to your reflections on that, because I keep hearing you say that these masculine ways of being are very useful and very helpful. And I just wanted to bring awareness to that we are talking about masculine ways of being, both in a positive light and in not so positive light. And so I just wanted to shed some light on that's true for both the masculine and the feminine, and it has to do with these unresolved traumas and shame and all of that. So I'd love your reflections in that area as well.
So it really begins with addressing our own inner masculine and feminine.
Uh-huh.
And because we all carry both masculine and feminine aspects, and ideally we have a sense of what they are and how they serve us as individuals, so that we can draw on those rather than being run by them.
Mm-hmm.
So I spent many years being run by my masculine side, and that stemmed from childhood sexual abuse and making a decision at some point, an unconscious decision, that nobody would ever control me or have power over me again. Mm-hmm. And so that sent me on a path of always making sure I was the one in control, mm-hmm. and becoming very controlling, and some of the shadow masculine aspects that can emerge. Mm-hmm. And when I started on the path of the divine feminine, I had a long way to go to even find my own inner feminine. Mm-hmm. And there are light and shadow aspects of course, of both our feminine and masculine parts. Mm-hmm. But there are ways that we can work with all of those inside of ourselves. And part of it requires that coming back to awareness of how we use these aspects of ourselves in different ways. So when I need to get things done, and it's been a time of getting a lot done, mm-hmm. for you as well, Sama.
Yes.
I call forth those masculine aspects of myself that are really good at the linear components, mm-hmm. of getting things done. And that, as you mentioned, creating structures, it's a huge one, something that I'm really good at. Mm-hmm. Not everybody is, but that's a masculine aspect of myself that I can draw on. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of internal wounding that happens to these aspects of ourselves because our parents and our teachers didn't necessarily know how to teach us, yeah. how to heal these aspects of ourselves or being in balance with these aspects of ourselves. Mm-hmm. But it's really as simple as inviting within a meditation an inner dialogue with one or the other or both. Mm-hmm. And it's an ongoing conversation. So if this isn't something that you as a listener have ever considered, it's really kind of a simple thing. If you can visualize, or if you don't visualize well, just feel into and invite forth whatever aspect of you want to know more about, and then ask them about themselves as if they are a separate part, because we of course all have these many different parts within us. Mm-hmm. And you can engage in a conversation with your inner masculine and or your inner feminine. Mm-hmm. And you can even invite them to have a conversation with each other, mm-hmm. and see what areas they need support in, that they need healing and they need help in. And that is such powerful work to do within ourselves. Because ultimately we can point fingers all over the place and say, there's the patriarchy and there's the wounded feminine or whatever. But when we come back and look inside of ourselves, we have a patriarchal part and we have a wounded feminine part. Mm-hmm. And we have the power to heal those aspects of ourselves.
Right. By making day-to-day choices in partnership between these different aspects. So, for example, I often associate the logical thinking mind with the masculine or the patriarchal way of doing things. But it's only patriarchal or damaging if it's in a domination role over the more feminine part of our mind, the subconscious mind, the body mind, right? Which is like 95% of our neural tissue is in that arena. And so it's, of course, quite imbalanced and unhealthy for this very small part of our brain, the logical thinking brain, to be the dominant thing that runs the show, when, that's really an illusion anyway. So coming back into a place of a balanced, harmonious partnership where all the parts have their roles and everybody, expresses their needs and makes then the collective decisions that benefit everyone are made in a healthy partnership, then reestablishing that relational pattern in our own self is one of these things that we could easily say you have to do that first before you can have a healthy relationship. But as we know, it's like, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? So for me, I notice that as I develop a healthier, more harmonious relationships within me, then that facilitates healthier, more harmonious partnership relationship with my partner and all of my relationships with everyone. And so it's such a beautiful return to that harmonious partnership. I know you share a bit about this. You've shared with me about things that have helped you along those lines, because all of these things we're talking about, the shame, the wounding, the disharmony between our archetypal parts, can really affect our relationships. And I would love any, in our family, our personal relationships, as well as our student relationships, student teacher type relationships, and bringing this principle of partnership and stepping away, unpacking the principle of domination as the foundation of things, is a big awareness that has to develop over time and seep into different areas of our experience and light up places that have been hidden inside of us. So I'm really curious to hear about you and how you bring partnership into your work, yourself, and your relationship. Another multifaceted question.
Yes, very much so. So I want to speak into an image that came to me while you were speaking, and we are 1 month out from Beltane, or May Day, and the image that came was the maypole, the weaving of the maypole. And so you have multicolored ribbons at the top of the pole, and the men are going one direction and the women are going the other, and they're weaving in and out, and then it creates the weaving of the different colors around the pole. There's so much beautiful symbolism here I won't even begin to get into, but it's this weaving. And if that pole is a lifetime, it's an ongoing process of weaving together our masculine and feminine parts. And then that, as we do that, that does spill over into our relationships. And there's, in romantic relationships, in love relationships, there's this piece around polarization. It's not really one of my specialties, but I'm certainly aware of it, that in a relationship, there's, if it's going to have passion in it, that there needs to be some polarity. And it doesn't necessarily mean if it's a male-female relationship, that the woman needs to be more feminine and the male more masculine, but somewhere in there needs to be polarity. And this is true in same-sex relationships as well.
Mm-hmm.
So is such a dance, and that comes back to the maypole metaphor. It's a dance that is ongoing and that continues to weave beautiful colored ribbons together. And sometimes when those maypoles are year after year after year, they get rewoven over and over again. But maybe right before the Beltane or the May Day of the next year, it's been rained on all year, and maybe those ribbons have gotten a little bit gray. It's refreshed again with a whole new weaving right over the top. And this is the complexity of the masculine and feminine in relationships. And even now, another interesting component to bring into is where I live, there's a huge conversation around non-binary identity. And I'm really educating myself as best as I can, and as best as I can receive that education from people that are still figuring it out on themselves. So that ultimately we all have the masculine and the feminine within us, no matter where we might identify on that spectrum or that continuum of gender. Because I'm guessing at different times in our lives, we find different places on that spectrum. And I mean, this wasn't really a thing when I was in my 20s, but certainly for younger people now, especially, it's really a big deal. But ultimately, we still have the inner masculine, the inner feminine. So we can always come back to that weaving, and we can always continue to bring these awarenesses into each of our relationships it's back to awareness again, witnessing, noticing without judgment. What just came out of my mouth? Did I just really say that? How do I want to do that differently next time? Do I want to do that differently next time? And what I really appreciate in my own beloved relationship is that the freedom to speak whatever is on my mind, even if it comes out sounding horrible, even if it sounds mean or whatever it is, I know that there is a space in which I can speak whatever is happening, whatever's going through me. And it doesn't need to be damaging or harmful. I know that he has the capacity to hold space for me to say whatever I need to say. And that just the person I am. Sometimes stuff just comes out of my mouth. A lot of Scorpio in there. So, but that's not always the case. There are people that I don't know so well that I'm very careful in how I speak with. So this is sort of a meander I'm on here, I realize.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful. All these different aspects coming to the surface and reflections. Meandering is kind of how we roll in these interviews. So thank you for taking a stroll with me along these lines of consideration and reflection. And I really appreciate you sharing all these aspects of your journey and your reflections. And I'm with you with the Scorpio thing, and I'm so grateful to be freeing my voice of some of the fearful sanctions I've held myself under for many years. So you're an inspiration to me with that too. The way that you share about that impacts me or touches me personally. In that I've had my voice under quite heavy sanction for quite some time, and this last period of time has been quite an opening and freeing of that. So your reflections on that are inspiration and fuel for my fire too. So thank you.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, just to loop it back to feminine leadership, is that really is our voices that need to find expression now.
Mm-hmm.
And the depth of what needs to be expressed has roots all the way down in our womb and our pelvis and our yoni. And we've got to make that reconnection in order to step fully into our power as women. We've got to reconnect our voice to our womb, to our pelvis, and to our yoni, and all the way down to our first chakra. And really even all the way down to the bottoms of our feet and our connection to the earth, because we speak for the earth as well.
And I would say that people of all genders, that this is a prayer
Absolutely.
to embody, and just bringing it back to what you were sharing about the non-binary movement or reflection, awareness that's arising. For me, it feels like the yin yang symbol, or even the Ouroboros that eats its own tail. When we talk about a continuum of gender where masculine extreme is over here and feminine extreme is over here, well, it's really actually a circle that
it is.
When you really go all the way to the one extreme, it sort of magically pops into the other extreme. Yes. It becomes the other extreme. They're really much closer than we think they are. And so and that there's a flow, we tend to think of the yin yang symbol as a static thing, but it's actually this bubble growing into the other, and then the other, and then it's this spinning sphere of moving energy. And that's what makes it alive. And that's what makes us alive, is this movement along and through these cycles of these different qualities that we might embody and experience at any given time. So this non-binary awareness is developing now in how we think and how we speak and all of that. But I was giving talks on the 11 genders back when I was graduating from college at the Ruth Festival. I read an article, and I was studying women's studies back then and gender issues and all of this. And I found this article about how there's biologically in all species, there's 11 genders, and that 4% of all species are naturally born hermaphroditic in some way or another. And there's all these different ways that that a creature can be hermaphroditic in one way or another. And the only reason we have this strict binary gender thing in humanity is because we've decided that that's not okay. And, and and so and now, I feel like those seeds of awareness that I began planting back then, where, people were like storming out of my talk like I was some crazy woman.
Yep, love it.
And rolling their eyes like, what the heck is she talking about? And now it's like all these people are, correcting me on my binary languaging. Yeah. I'm like, okay, I'm totally with you. Tell me how to say it. Let's talk genders. What's your pronoun, right?
Totally. Totally. I love that. Yeah, I'm so glad you shared that.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll never forget that. This guy like getting up and storming out of my talk. He came. It was a voluntary talk, He arrived and then he said some derogatory remarks and then, like, why did you come?
His stuff, not yours.
Yeah, right. But anyway, so such a rich conversation as usual, Amrita. Thank you so much for sharing your reflections. And this, this talk on feminine leadership, we're going to be diving even deeper into this talk during the summit. We're having a live circle. So most of the Embodied Shakti Summit consists of pre-recorded interviews like the one I did with Amrita. Will be released on a given day during the summit through an email. It will also, during the summit, we'll also be doing live circles where listeners can join in the Zoom call That's what this is that I'm recording this with Amrita on right now. But in the live event, you'll get a link to join us in the discussion. And Amrita is planning on being there. Another guest speaker, Neelam Nanwani from India, is also a workshop leader, feminine empowerment workshop leader in India and all over the world. So we're going to have some, and possibly some of the other guest speakers will join us for a panel discussion on feminine leadership. So you can sign up for the summit at embodiedshaktisummit.com, and you'll get a schedule of events for the summit, including all the days when all the speakers are speaking, and all the times and dates for the live events, including this feminine leadership event. And there's a bunch of others that I won't get into. It's just a lot that's happening. So please join us for the summit. And Rita, if someone wanted to get in touch with you specifically about your work, you have a website. Could you tell us the name of your website, or the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Absolutely. It's sacredfeminischool.com. And for the moment, for the next month or so, that'll redirect you to my website, amritagrace.com, which is standing in for the Sacred Feminine Mystery School until its new website is released on Beltane, May 1st.
All right. Beautiful. So some structural shifts and changes, building a new house for your work, isn't it?
Yes.
These online.
Lots of infrastructure.
Yes, beautiful. So thanks
I'm
again.
Really looking forward to the feminine leadership call.
Yes.
And I just can't wait to be connecting with women from all over the world on that subject. That is definitely a passion of mine.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So any last prayers, intentions, or words of wisdom for us to close out the call today?
May we each find our voice and our authenticity moment by moment in perfect divine timing at the perfect rate of speed for each of us individually.
And so it is. How can it be any other way?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sama.
Thank you. All right. So that's all for now. Until next time.